The scene was a 4-engine jetliner, and the pilot's voice came on the intercom. For those of you on the left side of the plane, you may have noticed that we've lost one of our engines. No reason to be alarmed. We will arrive, but we'll be about an hour late. It'll be about 5 p.m., arriving at our destination. So you'll get there in time for your evening meal. But a bit later, he came on the intercom and said, now, those of you on the right side of the plane, you may have noticed that we've lost another one of our engines. But don't be alarmed, we still have the 2 engines. But it is going to delay us arriving. You'll be now not having a 5 o'clock arrival, but a 7 p.m. arrival. So just plan on a late dinner. Well, he came on yet again. And this time, his voice sounded a bit more worried than before. But he said, I hate to have to announce and to inform you, but we've lost a 3rd engine. And this is going to delay us another 2 hours. But we should arrive at our destination by 9 p.m. so you can get to your home or to your hotel in plenty of time for an evening's rest. One of the men on the plane, he was getting kind of upset and worried after hearing the 1st engine went out, the 2nd engine went out, the 3rd engine went out. And then he just kind of blurted, if that 4th engine goes out, we'll be up here all night. You know, that 4th engine was their kind of that last bit of security, wasn't it? Well, it's the case sometimes that there's things that kind of give us security, and sometimes it's false sense of security. Some people, maybe it's because they've got a good job, things are well in the job, they have a good income, bank account's all right, so they kind of feel secure. Or maybe it's that, they're married, they are very, very satisfied in their marriage, their husband, their wife, and feel like, just the way it ought to be. And it'll last like it ought to till death do us part. Have a sense of security. Or maybe it's just that there's such a network of friends. I mean, such good friends. Ones that they know they could call up at any hour of the day with any need. They'd be there for them. And they're that way for their friends. So that provides them with that security. But sadly, if you've noticed, not yet mentioned God. Some people have a sense of security on things that, when you get right down to it, they are temporary and they're not lasting. No matter the job, no matter the money, no matter the marriage, no matter the friends. Death is going to take it all away. All are temporary. God is the only thing that is eternal. And so we'd have to say no. It's not a true sense of security, but a false sense when we just think in terms of job or family or friends. There was a young man. He lived about 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. And there were several things that he had going for him. He was an incredible warrior, especially at such a young age. He even had been recognized by the king and put over the army. He was even going to receive a daughter of the king to wed. And if that was not enough, his very, very best friend, one that he dearly loved, was the king's son. And then there was this prophet that, he was kind of the best prophet around for the time, and he knew him. And he counted him his friend, even his mentor. Oh, you see, there could have been security on the part of this young David. We're going to look at several things from chapters about 18 through 21. And we're going to see each one of those securities, as it were, just stripped away until it's just him Just him and God. You know, as you think back about David, lots of stories in the life of David. I have an idea that one of the most memorable is that time where he slew the giant Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, defeating therefore the Philistines in this battle and liberating God's people. And that was what you might say got him on the stage, as it were. Got the attention of the king and began to give him this position. But we can see that it was not always going to be. You see in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 6, it says, as they were coming home when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and with songs of joy and musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000. Then you read, and Saul was very angry. You might even say it's the beginning of the end of David and Saul's relationship. In fact, it displeased him so much that later, as you find just a few verses later, as David is playing the lyre for Saul, Saul had his spear in his hand and he hurled the spear with a thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Well, it's kind of surprising almost that even at this point, David still has any position before Saul, if that's Saul's intent. But then you find that verse 13, so Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. Now, if you had been reading but not been reading very carefully, somebody might get to that point and think, well, he's promoted. He's commander of 1,000 men. But you see, earlier, back in verse 5, it said, and David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. Now that sounds like David's over the entire army at that juncture. And of course, the successes were such that David had slain his 10,000s. But now, he's over 1,000. No, it's not a promotion. It is a demotion. Sometimes people say, yes, our company downsized. And I've gotten kind of switched over to a lesser job. Or somebody might say, I lost my job. Well, that's what's going on with David here. Now, though, over 1,000. But there's another interesting thing here. You know, just below that it says David marries Michal. You see, for David having slain Goliath, one of the, if you would call it, prizes was to marry the daughter of the king. Well, it speaks of how there's one daughter already married. But then there's Michal, and it speaks of that they loved one another. Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David. And so it looks like this thing's going to work out. But you see, David's from a poor family. He doesn't really have that price for the bride. But Saul bargains. He says, bring me the foreskins of 100 Philistines. And, there's really basically one way to do this. Kill 100 Philistines. In essence, Saul is thinking, Saul thought, let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. So he's thinking, okay, he goes and likely not now with the army, but just himself against these 100 Philistines. He'll lose his life. I've not had to do him harm. And we've rid ourselves of David. But You see, David is able to pay the price and able to marry Michal. Well, that doesn't end the story. We could wish it did, but not even close. In fact, chapter 19, I've got the heading, Saul tries to kill David. And you get down to verse 11, it says, Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Then Michal took an image and laid it on the bed, put a pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with the clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she says, he's sick. Then Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him. When the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, and the pillow of the goat's hair at his head. And then Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? Well, you know, in this little story, she's really lied twice, hasn't she? She's lied to the henchman of Saul, and now she lies to Saul, but she lies to him, but telling a lie on David. Why should I be killed? As if I had to help him. He would kill me. Now, we kind of begin to question, well, what exactly, has happened here, and where is Michal in all of this? We'll see just a few chapters later that, you see, Michal takes another husband. So basically at this juncture, he is lost. He's lost his favor with the king. He's lost his job. And how many men, seriously, if they would lose their job, it's almost they lose a sense of who they are. In fact, when people are introduced, what so often is the next question? What do you do? What do you do for a living? What kind of job do you have? So he loses all of this. He loses favor with the king. And now as well, he loses even his wife. Now, I can imagine the difficulties of losing the job. I cannot imagine what it is to lose your spouse. I know I'm speaking to some who are widows and widowers. You've had to experience that. And I have an idea that you'd tell me that there's no way for you to begin to understand until you actually experience it yourself. It's as if we could only imagine. But in this particular case, she's still living. But yet then later she even becomes another man's wife. And if you keep on reading the story, the story's not completely over, even though she remarries. But the relationship is never like it was, is it? Never again do you read like you do about how that Saul's daughter Michal loved David. 1 Kings 18, verse 20. So like that man in that airplane and that first engine goes out, it's kind of like, we've had the first engine goes out. He's lost the sense of who he is, his job, his favor with the king, his place in the court. And then if that's not bad enough, he then has lost his wife as well. And then the third thing that we find is that he loses his mentor. And you see, it's kind of like David is at this juncture basically running for his life. And so what does he do? And where does he go? Well, we find that he escaped And in chapter 19, verse 18, he came to Samuel at Ramoth. Samuel, that prophet, that one who had anointed him. The one, if there's anybody that you could say might be his mentor, Samuel. If there's anybody that he would put maybe his trust in, maybe besides Jonathan, Samuel. That's who it is. And then it reads, he told him all that Saul had done to him. Can you imagine just the pouring out of words as he probably chronicles every event that takes place from killing Goliath up until now? The rise and the fall. Even to the point of how that he threw the javelin at him, trying to pin him to the wall. Or maybe how that he had to escape, having his wife help him escape, as Saul had determined that he be killed. All this laid out at Samuel's feet. And even though I don't think that you get the impression here as you keep reading this, that Samuel was able to provide, as it were, an answer, fix it. You know, men like to fix things. All right, you might say, now listen, if my washing machine goes out, I'm calling the appliance repairman. But there's a sense in which men like to fix things. And if somebody comes to a man with their problems, what's going through that man's mind often is, how do I fix this thing? Well, on the part of Samuel, there really was no fixing it. And there are times we need to understand. Maybe we just need to listen. Maybe it's that we need to empathize. That the person that's telling us all this, they're not looking for a fix. They just kind of need to get it off their chest. Well, there is no real fix here except for the fact that, Saul's messengers, they come to take David. But then a unique and strange thing kind of happened is as they come, they start prophesying. God's miraculous intervention, that's all you could lay this to. And then the second time, Saul sends his messengers, and once again, then they start prophesying. And again, the only thing that you could lay this off to is the miraculous intervention of God. And then the third time, Saul sends messengers, and the same thing happens again. They begin prophesying. And it's not that he's sending all the people who have the propensity to be prophets. No. Rather, once again, the intervention of God in a miraculous way. So then Saul himself comes. And then you read kind of some strange things here. It says, beginning in verse 23, and he went there to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. As he went, he prophesied until he came to Naioth and Ramah. And he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, lay naked all that day and all that night. Thus it is said, is Saul also among the prophets. So Saul himself did the same thing. You can be sure his intention wasn't to go down there and prophesy. He wanted to go down there and secure David that would ultimately lead to David's death. And then in verse 1 of chapter 20, then David fled from Naioth. We don't have a lot of what was said except that David told Samuel all that has been happening. What'd Samuel say? Again, we really don't have much. But when you get down to this point here, you can't help but almost wonder if Samuel says, you're not safe here. I can't protect you. God's intervened with causing the spirit of prophecy to come upon his messengers the 3 times, and then Saul himself. But you're not safe here. You're going to have to go. So he loses his job, his position, his place in Saul's court. He loses his wife. And now going to his mentor. It's almost as if now he's losing him too. Not that Samuel's turned against him, not in any way that he's turned against him. But Saul realizes David realizes, I'm not safe here. I'm going to have to go. Well, then there's a fourth thing that he loses. He ultimately is losing too his best friend. You get to chapter 20, it says Jonathan warns David. Well, Jonathan and David, they meet up. Jonathan doesn't really want to believe that his father has reverted back to wanting David dead. But in a series of events that follow, he was convinced and saw no other recourse than that he and his friend part company. Saul had even thrown his spirit Jonathan in his rage. And Jonathan met David at a prearranged place and told him of his father's wrath. When you get over to 1 Samuel 20, beginning of verse 41, it says, "And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap, fell on his face to the ground, and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. And Jonathan said to David, 'Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.' And he arose and departed. Jonathan went into the city." Okay, let's see, he lost his job at his place in the court. He's lost his wife. He's lost his mentor. He's now lost his best friend. It's like everyone he goes to that he has trust in, maybe they can help me. They couldn't. Even if they'd wanted to, they couldn't. Well, but he's not quite lost everything yet. You see, he's still fleeing. And you get over to chapter 21 and verse 10. It said, "And David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Did you realize where we are? We're in that place that would be kind of like the hometown, if you would, of Goliath. He's among the Philistines. He's with now the enemy, essentially.' Well, they recognize him. Verse 11, "And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And then David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath." Now listen to what he does. "So he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane." Other translations say a madman. "In their hands, and made marks on the doors of the gate." In other words, kind of erratic behavior. "And then let his spittle run down his beard," like he's foaming at the mouth, acting insane or like a madman. Erratic behavior. Just like he's foaming at the mouth, just spittle running down. "Then Achish said to his servants, 'Behold, you see, the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?'" So now basically you can say he loses his own personal dignity. I don't think anybody in here has gone through quite like what David has during this period of time. Because you get down to this point, it's like he's by himself. That's it. He's lost his job, position, big position. He lost his wife. He's lost his mentor. He's lost his best friend. And he's even lost his personal dignity. Now I know somebody might take a step back and say, hey, he's not Job. Really, Job had it worse. If we're going to start kind of who had it worse, I guess we would say, yeah, Job had it worse. But the beauty of both of these men is that they maintain their integrity. And how that, if you would, they have God as their anchor, God as their security. If you want to see into the heart of David, of how he felt when these things were happening, several of the Psalms kind of give us a peek into his heart and into his life when these things were happening. But now what about you? What about me? Are bad things going to happen? If you have any age on you, you've had some bad things happen. And if you get very much age on you, you're going to have some very bad things happen. And it may be loss of a job. It may be loss of a spouse due to death, and even sadder than that, to divorce. It could be that you've got to say goodbye to your best friends, your mentor. Maybe in some way you begin to lose even your personal dignity. Well, I hope that we haven't let all of those things kind of be what makes us feel good about ourselves, on which our self-esteem is based. But rather, we've looked beyond and we've grabbed hold of what's better than these temporary things, because all these things are temporary. And we let God be our anchor. We let God be the one that we depend on. That God is our security. So what is it tonight? What is your security? Is it your job? Is it financial security? Is it your family relationships? Is it maybe a mentor, or is it your close friends? Is it that you have your own personal dignity still? Or is it the eternal God and Father? If we could assist you tonight in your obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ, we'd be so glad to do so. If you'd be that penitent believer, we give you that opportunity to confess your faith and immerse you into Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sins. And if there's need for prayer, I'd be glad to take that time and pray for you. If you need to come, please come as we